There comes a point in your life when silence becomes more powerful than explanation, when you no longer feel the urge to convince people of your worth, your loyalty, your intentions. That's not weakness. That's growth, and in that growth, you learn one of the most liberating phrases you'll ever carry. No explanation, just distance. I've lived in rooms where I was too much and not enough all at the same time, where people praised my light, then asked me to dim it. I've stood in circles where being kind was mistaken for being weak, where loyalty was exploited, where honesty wasn't appreciated, it was feared. And in trying to make it all make sense, I exhausted myself. I explained my heart, my dreams, my boundaries, my silence, my anger, all for people who weren't even listening. Until one day I stopped. I stopped defending my softness. I stopped justifying why I needed space. I stopped offering explanations to people who had already made up their minds about me, and instead I gave them something else: distance. Not as revenge, not as drama, but as self-respect. See, distance is not about shutting people out. It's about protecting your peace. It's about honoring your intuition when it whispers, "This is not safe. This is not for you. This is not love." You don't need to send a long message. You don't owe a sit-down conversation. Not everyone deserves access to the backstage of your life just because they bought a front row seat once upon a time. There is power in walking away quietly. There's strength in choosing solitude over shallow company. You don't have to slam the door. You just have to stop opening it. Because when you step back, when you choose peace over performance, you teach the world how to treat you. You remind them and yourself that your time, your energy, your heart are privileges, not entitlements. The truth is, the people who love you, really love you, won't need an explanation. They'll feel your silence, they'll understand your distance, and they'll either rise to meet your worth or quietly fade into the background of a life they were never meant to stay in. So, if you're in a place where your spirit feels drained from over-explaining who you are, take this as your permission slip. You don't have to explain why you left the table that no longer served love, honesty, or respect. You don't have to clarify why your boundaries exist. You don't need to make them comfortable with your decision. No explanation, just distance, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. There comes a stage in life when you realize that not everyone deserves a seat at the table of your truth. Growth isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, internal, and deeply personal. And one of the clearest signs of that inner transformation is when you stop explaining yourself to people who aren't really trying to understand you. When you're younger or unsure of your worth, you often find yourself constantly trying to make others see your heart, your intentions, and your point of view. You write long messages, rehearse conversations in your mind, and go out of your way to be understood. But the truth is, those who genuinely care don't need the full story, and those who demand endless explanations usually aren't listening in the first place. Real growth begins when you no longer feel compelled to convince people to see the good in you. It's the moment you understand that your value isn't up for debate. It's not a negotiation. You don't need to prove your loyalty to someone who's already made assumptions about your character. You don't have to explain your silence to someone who never respected your voice in the first place. When you start prioritizing your peace, your mental clarity, and your self-worth, you naturally stop giving people access to your inner world just to validate your decisions. You begin to understand that not everyone is entitled to your story. Not everyone is ready to see your depth or hold your vulnerability with care. And rather than trying to force connections, you let things be. You let people walk away if they must. You let situations dissolve without trying to glue them back together with endless justifications. This kind of release is not bitterness, it's wisdom. It's knowing that your energy is sacred, and wasting it on people who question your every move only drains your spirit. The need to over-explain usually comes from insecurity, from a desire to be liked, understood, or accepted. But once you stand in your own truth and begin to like the person you've become, the need for others to get it fades. You become more comfortable with silence, with distance, and with moving forward without fanfare. You trust that the right people will feel your heart without needing paragraphs, and that the wrong ones don't deserve your breath. In this kind of growth, freedom is found, and in that freedom there is peace. Choosing distance over confrontation isn't about being cold or unkind. It's about recognizing your worth and protecting your energy. There comes a time when you no longer feel the need to fight to be heard, seen, or validated. Instead, you simply step back, not because you want to hurt anyone, not because you're angry, but because you've reached a point where peace matters more than being right or staying in spaces that no longer feel safe. Distance becomes your quiet response to chaos, disrespect, or misunderstanding. It's not an act of revenge, it's a boundary. It's a way of saying, I matter enough to walk away from what disturbs my soul. When you choose distance, you're not trying to teach someone a lesson. You're simply putting your peace first. You begin to realize that every time you explain yourself to someone who doesn't truly value you, you shrink a little. Every time you try to justify your emotions to someone who mocks your sensitivity, you lose a bit of your light. And after a while, you just stop. Not because you've given up, but because you've grown up. You now understand that silence can be more powerful than words. That sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is walk away with dignity instead of staying and begging for understanding. Distance doesn't always mean you don't care. In fact, sometimes you care so deeply that you know staying in that relationship, that conversation, or that environment will slowly drain everything beautiful from within you. So you choose space. You choose to protect the softness of your heart, the clarity of your mind, and the strength of your spirit. You recognize that not everything requires a reaction, and not everyone deserves a response. Some situations are best left with unanswered questions, and that's okay. There is a quiet power in simply pulling back, realigning yourself, and moving forward without drama. The peace that comes with not having to explain your absence to people who never valued your presence is liberating. When you stop chasing closure from people who created confusion, you free yourself. You start attracting what matches your energy instead of settling for what drains it. In choosing distance, you send a message, not to others, but to yourself. You affirm that your well-being is not negotiable, that your peace is a priority, and that sometimes walking away silently is the loudest declaration of self-love there is. You don't need to justify your boundaries to anyone. That truth alone can transform your life. For far too long, people, especially women, have been conditioned to believe that setting boundaries is selfish, rude, or dramatic. We're taught to over-explain why we said no, why we walked away, why we chose ourselves. But the reality is, boundaries are not walls, they are bridges to peace, and they don't require approval to be valid. They exist to protect your energy, not to make others comfortable. The moment you realize that, everything changes. When you create boundaries, you're not being cruel, you're being clear, you're honoring your emotional and mental space, drawing a line between what you will allow and what you won't. Some people will be offended by that. Not because you did something wrong, but because they benefited from your lack of limits. When you finally say, no, I won't accept this, you disrupt the dynamic that once served them, and in that moment you'll be tempted to explain. To make it sound softer, to offer a detailed justification so they understand your side, but you don't need to do that. You are allowed to choose what's best for you without making everyone else feel okay about it. The truth is, people who respect you won't need an explanation for your boundaries. They will hear you the first time. They will honor your needs without turning it into a debate. It's only the ones who feel entitled to your time, your energy, or your compliance who will push back. And their discomfort is not your responsibility. You are not required to make your no sound like a maybe. You don't need to explain why your peace matters more than pleasing someone else. You don't owe anyone a story about your healing, your decisions, or your silence. Learning to set boundaries without guilt is one of the most powerful forms of self-love. It means you've finally accepted that your voice matters, that your needs are real, and that your worth isn't defined by how much of yourself you sacrifice for others. You stop trying to prove that you're a good person by allowing bad behavior to continue. Instead, you choose alignment, you choose truth, you choose you, and the beautiful thing is, the more you do this, the less you'll feel the need to explain anything. You'll stand firm in your decisions, not out of arrogance, but out of a deep respect for your own soul. You don't need to justify your boundaries to anyone. That truth alone can transform your life. For far too long, people, especially women, have been conditioned to believe that setting boundaries is selfish, rude, or dramatic. We're taught to over-explain why we said no, why we walked away, why we chose ourselves. But the reality is, boundaries are not walls. They are bridges to peace, and they don't require approval to be valid. They exist to protect your energy, not to make others comfortable. The moment you realize that, everything changes. When you create boundaries, you're not being cruel. You're being clear. You're honoring your emotional and mental space, drawing a line between what you will allow and what you won't. Some people will be offended by that. Not because you did something wrong, but because they benefited from your lack of limits. When you finally say, "No, I won't accept this," you disrupt the dynamic that once served them, and in that moment, you'll be tempted to explain. To make it sound softer, to offer a detailed justification so they understand your side. But you don't need to do that. You are allowed to choose what's best for you without making everyone else feel okay about it. The truth is, people who respect you won't need an explanation for your boundaries. They will hear you the first time. They will honor your needs without turning it into a debate. It's only the ones who feel entitled to your time, your energy, or your compliance who will push back. And their discomfort is not your responsibility. You are not required to make your no sound like a maybe. You don't need to explain why your peace matters more than pleasing someone else. You don't owe anyone a story about your healing, your decisions, or your silence. Learning to set boundaries without guilt is one of the most powerful forms of self-love. It means you've finally accepted that your voice matters, that your needs are real, and that your worth isn't defined by how much of yourself you sacrifice for others. You stop trying to prove that you're a good person by allowing bad behavior to continue. Instead, you choose alignment, you choose truth, you choose you. And the beautiful thing is, the more you do this, the less you'll feel the need to explain anything. You'll stand firm in your decisions, not out of arrogance, but out of a deep respect for your own soul. In life, the people who genuinely care for you won't need a detailed explanation to understand your silence or your need for space. They'll feel it, they'll sense the shift in your energy, and rather than take it personally or react with ego, they'll respond with empathy. Real connection operates beyond words. It sees through the pauses, hears the unspoken, and respects the invisible boundaries that are sometimes needed for healing, reflection, or peace. When a bond is rooted in authenticity, it doesn't rely on constant explanations to stay alive. It flows naturally even when there's distance. It honors both presence and absence with grace. True relationships are not threatened by silence. They don't panic when you withdraw for a while. Instead, they remain steady, understanding that sometimes the strongest support is quiet and patient. You shouldn't feel pressure to constantly perform emotional clarity for those who love you. If you need space to recalibrate your heart, if you need time to process your emotions without articulating every thought, the right people will understand that. They won't demand answers or take offense. They'll simply be there, quietly holding space for you in your absence. There is something powerful about being understood without having to explain. It means someone sees you for who you are, not just what you say. They trust your heart even when you can't find the words. They respect your rhythm and don't force you into emotional labor to make them feel secure. These people are rare, but when you find them, you'll feel an unmistakable sense of safety. You'll know you're not loved for your performance, but for your presence, your essence, your truth. And just as the right people won't demand explanations, the wrong ones will. They'll take your silence as an insult, your boundaries as a threat, and your distance as a personal attack. That's how you know who's truly aligned with your soul. The ones who constantly need defending, reasoning, and apologizing are often more interested in control than connection. But the ones who offer you space without question, they're your peace. You don't have to exhaust yourself making sure everyone is okay with your decisions. The people meant for you will respect you enough to trust your process. They won't require you to explain your every emotion. They'll stay grounded in your absence, and they'll still be there when you return. That's what real love looks like. That's what it feels like to be truly seen. There comes a moment in life when you realize that preserving your peace is more important than proving a point. The need to be understood, to be right, or to have the last word starts to fade. You stop chasing closure in conversations that only bring more confusion. You stop arguing with people who twist your words. You stop wasting energy trying to explain yourself to those who have already made up their minds. And in that surrender, you find something priceless, peace. Not the kind that comes from everything going perfectly, but the kind that comes from choosing yourself over constant emotional battles. Proving a point may bring a momentary sense of victory, but it rarely brings lasting relief. Because when you invest your energy into trying to make others see your side, especially when they're committed to misunderstanding you, you only drain yourself. You get pulled into cycles of overthinking, frustration, and emotional exhaustion. At some point, you realize that not every argument is worth your voice, not every accusation deserves your defense, not every misunderstanding needs to be cleared up. Sometimes, the best response is no response at all. Walking away from unnecessary battles doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise. It means you're strong enough to choose your mental and emotional well-being over ego. It means you know that inner peace is far more valuable than external validation. You learn to discern when silence is more powerful than words. You become more selective about where your energy goes, and that shift changes everything. You start attracting calmer experiences, more grounded relationships, and a deeper sense of self-respect. People may call it cold or distant when you refuse to engage, but it's not about shutting down, it's about tuning in. You're not ignoring people, you're honoring yourself. You're protecting your space from being filled with arguments that lead nowhere. You're saving your breath for conversations that build bridges, not burn them. You're no longer explaining your boundaries, you're simply enforcing them with grace and clarity. There's a quiet strength in letting someone else have the last word while you walk away in peace. There's wisdom in choosing silence when you know your truth doesn't need defending. The older you get, the more you realize that peace is not passive, it's powerful, and it's a choice you make every time you decide to protect your soul instead of pleasing your pride. When you choose peace over proving a point, you choose a life that honors your spirit, and that kind of life is worth everything. Sometimes, the most powerful statement you can make is choosing to say nothing at all. Silence, when used intentionally, carries a weight that words often fail to hold. It's not about passive aggression or avoidance. It's about rising above noise that doesn't deserve your voice. When you decide to stop explaining, stop defending, and simply step away, your silence becomes louder than any argument, any justification, any emotional outburst. It says, "I've said enough." It says, "I know my worth." It says, "This conversation no longer serves my growth." And without speaking, you reclaim your power. In a world that constantly demands your opinion, your reaction, your explanation, choosing silence is a bold move. People are often uncomfortable with it because they can't control or predict it. They expect a fight, a breakdown, a confrontation. But when you offer none of that, only stillness, they're forced to sit with the truth that your absence speaks. Silence doesn't mean you're weak or indifferent. It means you're intentional. It means you've outgrown the need to explain every feeling to those who never truly valued your perspective in the first place. There's strength in restraint. There's wisdom in knowing when words are wasted and when silence can teach what speeches cannot. When you withhold your reaction, you are not suppressing your truth. You're safeguarding it. You're choosing not to expose your depth to those who won't appreciate it. You're not giving away your peace just to be heard by someone who only listens to reply, not to understand. And in that space, you gain clarity. You hear your own thoughts more clearly. You stand taller in your truth. Some people will try to interpret your silence as defeat, as if you've backed down. But that's only because they've mistaken volume for power. Real strength isn't loud, it's composed, centered, and steady. And when you've reached that place of inner stillness, you no longer feel the urge to convince others of your side. You simply walk away. You don't slam the door, you don't scream over your shoulder, you just leave, and that departure, wrapped in silence, becomes the most unforgettable message you'll ever deliver. The beauty of silence is that it doesn't beg to be understood. It doesn't ask for permission. It stands on its own, full of dignity and grace. And when you learn to embrace it, you realize you never needed to shout to make an impact. You just needed to walk away, with your head high and your peace intact. Thank you.